Welcome, dear listener, to a journey through time. Today, we embark on a fascinating exploration of one of history's most iconic and misunderstood civilizations, the Vikings. They are often remembered for their fierce raids and conquests, but their world was so much more than that. Join me as we step back into the frozen landscapes of the north, where the Vikings lived, worked, and thrived in ways that still shape the world today. Close your eyes and imagine a world of rugged fjords, dense forests and towering mountains, a land where winter stretches long, the winds howl through the trees, and the sea crashes violently against jagged shores. This is the world of the Vikings, a place of beauty, danger, and a hard-won survival. Now picture yourself walking through a small Viking village. The scent of wood smoke fills the air, mingling with the salty tang of the sea. You pass rows of longhouses, simple yet sturdy buildings with thatched roofs. Inside, the warmth of the hearth offers relief from the biting cold. Children run about, playing with toys carved from wood, while the adults go about their daily chores, preparing for the long winter ahead. But these Vikings were more than just farmers and fishermen. They were explorers, traders, and warriors. From their northern homeland in Scandinavia, they sailed out to the farthest corners of the known world, bringing back treasures and new knowledge that would change the course of history. They were a people defined by their resilience, their resourcefulness, and their unyielding determination to survive in one of the harshest climates on Earth. So, dear listener, as we delve into the life of the Vikings, I invite you to reflect on what it meant to live in a world where every day was a struggle for survival and every meal was earned with sweat and blood. Let us journey into the Viking past and uncover the stories of these remarkable people, warriors, traders, and settlers who forged a legacy that still resonates today. Imagine a world where the sun hardly shines for months at a time. A world where the land is raw, untamed, and as unforgiving as it is beautiful. This is the world the Vikings called home. Scandinavia, a land of rugged fjords, snow-capped mountains, and endless forests. In the summer, the landscape seems to come alive with vibrant greens, dotted with brightly colored wildflowers. But the seasons in this northern land are as extreme as the people who live there. The long, harsh winters are long, with little light and freezing temperatures. Snow piles high, and the ground is often frozen, making farming difficult. Yet, despite the challenges, the Vikings thrived in this environment. They were survivors, farmers, fishermen, and hunters who made the most of the limited resources at their disposal. In these extreme conditions, they developed a deep connection with the land and the sea. Their survival depended on both. The Vikings built their homes to withstand the harsh winters. Longhouses, large timber-framed buildings with thatched roofs, lined the small villages. These homes were designed to keep in warmth from the hearth, as a Viking family would often sleep, cook, and live in one shared space. The hearth was the heart of every home, a source of warmth and light, essential for cooking and surviving the bitter cold. The Vikings were skilled farmers, but they also faced the realities of living in a short growing season. They relied heavily on the sea for food, catching fish, hunting marine animals, and gathering seaweed. Fish in particular was a cornerstone of the Viking diet, and dried fish became a valuable commodity traded across Europe and beyond. In the harsh winters, when food was scarce and the land was covered with snow, Vikings turned to their stored supplies: dried fish, salted meats, barley, and rye. These foods formed the backbone of the Viking diet, providing the sustenance they needed to survive. But there was more to Viking food than just surviving. It was a community affair, a part of daily life that tied them to their land, their gods, and their people. Imagine a world where the sun hardly shines for months at a time. A world where the land is raw, untamed, and as unforgiving as it is beautiful. This is the world the Vikings called home. Scandinavia, a land of rugged fjords, snow-capped mountains, and endless forests. In the summer, the landscape seems to come alive with vibrant greens, dotted with brightly colored wildflowers. But the seasons in this northern land are as extreme as the people who live there. The long, harsh winters are long, with little light and freezing temperatures. Snow piles high, and the ground is often frozen, making farming difficult. Yet, despite the challenges, the Vikings thrived in this environment. They were survivors, farmers, fishermen, and hunters who made the most of the limited resources at their disposal. In these extreme conditions, they developed a deep connection with the land and the sea. Their survival depended on both. The Vikings built their homes to withstand the harsh winters. Longhouses, large timber-framed buildings with thatched roofs, lined the small villages. These homes were designed to keep in warmth from the hearth, as a Viking family would often sleep, cook, and live in one shared space. The hearth was the heart of every home, a source of warmth and light, essential for cooking and surviving the bitter cold. The Vikings were skilled farmers, but they also faced the realities of living in a short growing season. They relied heavily on the sea for food, catching fish, hunting marine animals, and gathering seaweed. Fish in particular was a cornerstone of the Viking diet, and dried fish became a valuable commodity traded across Europe and beyond. In the harsh winters, when food was scarce and the land was covered with snow, Vikings turned to their stored supplies: dried fish, salted meats, barley, and rye. These foods formed the backbone of the Viking diet, providing the sustenance they needed to survive. But there was more to Viking food than just surviving. It was a community affair, a part of daily life that tied them to their land, their gods, and their people. At the heart of every Viking settlement was the longhouse, where families lived together under one roof. These longhouses were made from timber and thatch, designed to withstand the fierce winds and snow that swept through the region. The walls were thick, the windows small, and the roofs were steeply pitched to allow snow to slide off. Inside, the longhouse was warm and welcoming. The hearth sat at the center of the room, providing both warmth and light. The smell of wood smoke filled the air, and the crackling of the fire was a constant soundtrack to daily life. Families gathered around the hearth to cook, eat, and share stories. In the evenings, the flickering flames would cast dancing shadows on the walls as the family came together. The Vikings were a communal people. They worked together to build their homes, farm their lands, and raise their children. The role of the woman in Viking society was just as important as that of the man. Women were responsible for managing the household, making clothing, preparing food, and raising children. They had considerable influence within their households, and in some cases, even in matters of trade and land ownership. The Viking men, in addition to farming, engaged in hunting, fishing, and crafting. But it was their voyages that made them famous. Skilled navigators and boat builders, they crafted the long ships that would carry them to distant lands. These ships were a marvel of Viking engineering, designed to be both fast and flexible, allowing the Vikings to sail across the open seas or navigate the shallow waters of rivers. Viking villages were often located near water, allowing easy access to the sea for trade and raiding. It was through the sea that the Vikings would eventually come into contact with other cultures, from the shores of England to the coasts of North America. But it was also the sea that shaped their food and their way of life. The Vikings' diet was heavily based on what the sea provided. The Viking world was shaped by its landscapes. Both the beauty and harshness of nature influenced how they lived, worked, and ate. Their homes were simple but practical, designed for the harsh climates of Scandinavia. Their food was basic, relying on what the land and sea provided, but it was enough to survive. In the next section, we will delve into the Viking spirit, how these hardy people became both fierce warriors and skilled settlers. Stay with us as we continue to explore the fascinating world of the Vikings, where survival, exploration, and food all intertwined to create one of the most remarkable cultures in history. The Vikings, at their core, were warriors. This was a society built on strength, honor, and the relentless pursuit of victory. From the moment a Viking boy was able to hold a sword, he was trained for battle. Physical strength, strategic thinking, and knowledge of the longship became second nature to him. The Vikings' need for defense, along with their insatiable appetite for expansion and conquest, gave rise to a deeply ingrained warrior culture. In Viking society, the warrior ethos was pervasive. It shaped everything from daily life to religious beliefs. Men trained for battle in every season, honing their skills in the arts of swordplay, archery, and hand-to-hand combat. When they weren't training, they were out hunting, which further sharpened their survival instincts. Viking warriors were not only skilled in the use of weapons, but were also trained to endure hardship, as their raids and expeditions could take them into harsh and unforgiving lands. But Viking warriors were not merely trained in combat. They were trained in honor. A Viking's reputation was everything, and much of this reputation was built on his prowess in battle. To die in battle was to achieve the ultimate honor, for Viking warriors believed in a glorious afterlife in Valhalla. Valhalla was the Hall of the Slain, a grand palace ruled by the god Odin, where the bravest of warriors would fight, feast, and drink with their gods forever. A Viking who died a noble death in battle was guaranteed a place in Valhalla. And for those who lived to return, the warrior's reputation and honor were just as important as the spoils of battle. The best warriors were often revered in life and death, and songs and sagas would be sung in their honor long after they were gone. Daisy, Shield Maiden. An intriguing facet of Viking warrior culture is the presence of women warriors, known as Shield Maidens. While not all women fought in battle, there were certain women in Viking society who took up arms and fought alongside the men. Shield Maidens were often skilled in the use of weapons and were sometimes revered as equals to their male counterparts. They were symbols of strength and independence, capable of commanding respect on the battlefield. In fact, the sagas of the Vikings tell of a number of famous shield maidens, including Lagertha and Freydis Eiriksdottir. Lagertha, according to the sagas, was not only a fierce warrior, but also the wife of the famous Viking king Ragnar Lothbrok. Freydis, on the other hand, was known for her bravery during the Viking exploration of North America. Shield maidens are now seen as a powerful symbol of the equality and courage that were integral to Viking culture. Raiding. The path to power and wealth. Viking raids are what most people associate with the Vikings. These terrifying expeditions were not only a means of survival, but also a way to gain wealth and power. Vikings would leave their homes in search of richer lands to pillage, often raiding monasteries, towns, and villages along the coasts of Europe. The first recorded Viking raid was in 793 AD at the Lindisfarne Monastery in England, a turning point that marked the beginning of the Viking Age. The Vikings were expert sailors and navigators, using their longships to strike quickly and decisively. Their ships, with their sleek hulls and shallow drafts, allowed them to sail swiftly along coastlines and navigate rivers. The longship was more than just a vessel. It was a weapon. With oars on each side, the Vikings could row quietly into ports, catch their prey by surprise, and retreat before any retaliation could occur. Their raids were lightning fast and brutal, characterized by violent pillaging and the seizure of valuable goods like gold, silver, and slaves. However, raiding was not only about wealth, it was about power and prestige. Viking leaders or chieftains often commanded large fleets of ships, leading their warriors into battle. The raids brought riches, but they also brought honor. A successful raid could enhance a chieftain's reputation, making him more powerful and more influential within Viking society. The Viking raids were also a means of exploration. As they raided various parts of Europe, Vikings often settled in the lands they conquered. They established colonies in England, Ireland, France, and even as far as Russia and North America. The cities of York and Dublin in England, for example, were once thriving Viking settlements. These settlements were not simply military outposts, but became vibrant cultural hubs where Viking customs, laws, and traditions blended with those of the local population. Exploration. From the north to the west, Viking exploration is one of their most extraordinary legacies. Though they are often remembered as ruthless raiders, the Vikings were also extraordinary explorers and navigators. They were the first Europeans to set foot on North America almost 500 years before Christopher Columbus. The Viking exploration of the North Atlantic was spearheaded by figures like Leif Erikson, the son of the famous explorer Eric the Red. Leif's voyages to Greenland and Newfoundland are well documented in Viking sagas. These journeys were perilous and required incredible skills in navigation and seamanship. Vikings relied on the stars, the sun's position, and even the winds to guide their way across vast stretches of open ocean. Their ships were sturdy enough to withstand treacherous seas, and their knowledge of currents and winds made them exceptional sailors. The Vikings established settlements in Greenland, Iceland, and the Faroe Islands, lands that they called home for centuries. But it was Leif Erikson's expedition to Vinland, a region believed to be located in modern-day Newfoundland, that marked the Vikings' most remarkable achievement in exploration. Though the settlement in Vinland was short-lived, it was proof of the Vikings' reach and their ability to survive in remote and hostile environments. Viking exploration was not limited to the west. The Vikings also ventured eastward, establishing trading routes through Russia to the Byzantine Empire and the Caliphates. These trade routes brought riches from the east, such as silk, spices, and silver, into the Viking world and allowed them to engage in diplomacy and trade with other powerful cultures. The Vikings' role as explorers is an integral part of their identity. They were not just raiders, but were also a people who sought to understand and expand their world. Whether it was discovering new lands, forging trade routes, or establishing settlements, the Vikings left a lasting impact on the places they encountered. Contrast: raiders versus settlers. While the Vikings were known for their fierce raids, they were also skilled settlers. The Vikings who ventured to the British Isles, France, and even North America didn't simply destroy. Many stayed behind, formed communities, and integrated into the local populations. In the case of the Danelaw in England, for example, Vikings set up a semi-autonomous region where their laws, culture, and religion took root. In France, the Vikings eventually became the Normans, a group that played a pivotal role in European history, most notably through the conquest of England in 1066. The dichotomy between raiders and settlers is one of the defining features of Viking society. While the warriors gained fame through their conquests, the settlers laid the foundation for the Viking legacy, blending with other cultures and contributing to the development of new societies. This duality in Viking identity, both brutal and civilized, made them one of the most complex and fascinating cultures in history. In the fierce raiders and fearless explorers, we see the spirit of the Vikings come alive. Their legacy is not just one of brutality and conquest, but also one of innovation, resilience, and far-reaching influence. The Vikings, with their warrior culture, their expeditions, and their ability to settle and shape the lands they touched, have left an indelible mark on history. Daily life in the Viking Age. A glimpse into their world. The Viking Age was marked by a unique blend of hardship and resilience. While the Viking warrior was often celebrated for his ferocity on the battlefield, the daily life of a Viking was shaped by more mundane, yet no less important concerns. Survival in a harsh climate meant that Vikings had to be ingenious, resourceful, and closely connected to their families and communities. Life for most Vikings centered around the longhouse, where families gathered not only to sleep, but also to work, cook, and eat. These homes, though simple, were the heart of Viking life. The longhouse was constructed with timber, and the roofs were made from thatched grass or sod to provide insulation against the cold. In the winter months, these homes were a sanctuary against the freezing temperatures outside. The hearth was the focal point of every longhouse, providing warmth, light, and a place to cook. Inside, the space was divided into areas for sleeping, eating, and storage. The Viking family was an extended unit, meaning that multiple generations often lived together under one roof. The walls were lined with storage chests containing food, tools, and clothing. In Viking society, there was no luxury of separate rooms. Everything happened in the same space, and every family member contributed to the daily work. The daily routine was dominated by the cycles of nature. Farming was the backbone of Viking life, particularly for those living in settled communities. The Vikings relied on their livestock, such as cows, sheep, and pigs, for meat, milk, wool, and leather. They also cultivated crops such as barley, rye, and oats, which they used to make bread, porridge, and ale. The short growing season in Scandinavia meant that farming was not always easy, and Viking farmers had to make the most of the land they had. They were skilled at managing their resources and were able to store grain, preserve meat, and use their limited space as efficiently as possible. In addition to farming, hunting and fishing were essential for providing food for the Viking family. Vikings were expert hunters, and many people relied on wild game to supplement their diet. The forests and rivers of Scandinavia were full of wildlife. Deer, elk, wild boar, rabbits, and various birds were all hunted. The Vikings also made use of the sea, with fishing being a major source of food. Herring, cod, and salmon were some of the most common fish, and the Vikings became expert fishermen. However, despite the abundance of nature around them, food was often scarce, and the Viking diet was relatively simple. Bread and porridge were staples, and meat, when available, was often salted or smoked to preserve it for the winter. For the common Viking, meals consisted mostly of vegetables, grains, and fish, with meat being a rare luxury. During feasts, however, the diet was far more extravagant, with roast meats, breads, cheeses and meads being shared by all. Viking food. What did they eat? Food in Viking society was simple and practical, shaped by the need to survive in a cold and often unforgiving environment. For most Vikings, eating was not a luxury but a necessity, a way to stay alive and work. Bread and porridge. The two staples of the Viking diet were bread and porridge. Vikings often made bread from barley, rye or oats, and while they did occasionally bake with wheat, it was less common. Bread was dense and heavy, designed to sustain energy through long working hours. Rye bread in particular was a favorite among Vikings, and it was often eaten with cheese, butter, or dried meat. Porridge was another daily fixture. Made from oats or barley, it was cooked with water or milk, providing a filling meal. The Vikings often ate it for breakfast or dinner, adding berries, honey, or butter to flavor it. Porridge was easy to prepare and could be eaten hot or cold, making it a versatile and sustaining dish for the long winters. Meat and fish. While Vikings were not always able to eat meat regularly, when they could, it was usually preserved through salting, drying, or smoking. The most common meats were pork, beef, and lamb. Vikings also raised chickens for eggs and meat, and in some cases they hunted wild game, such as deer, elk, and boar. The Vikings were particularly fond of roasted meats, and communal feasts often featured large roasts, with whole animals being prepared for special occasions. Fish, particularly herring, was an important part of the Viking diet, especially for those living along the coast. The Vikings were expert fishermen and relied on fish as a major source of protein. They salted, smoked, or dried fish to preserve it for the winter months. Herring was especially popular and could be found in abundance during the fishing season. Vegetables and herbs. Vikings grew a variety of vegetables, although their options were limited by the short growing season. Root vegetables like turnips, carrots, and onions were common. Cabbage and leeks were also grown, providing vitamins and nutrients. During the colder months, these vegetables were often boiled into soups or stews, where they were combined with meats, grains, and herbs. Herbs and spices were used sparingly, with the Vikings primarily relying on garlic, onions, mustard, and dill to flavor their food. Due to their geographical location, spices like cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg were rare and expensive, reserved mostly for the wealthy. For most people, the main focus was on making the most of what they could grow or catch, and flavor was secondary. Alcohol and dairy. The Vikings were also known for their love of ale and mead. Ale, made from barley or wheat, was consumed in large quantities. It was the main drink for both men and women, as clean drinking water was often scarce, and the fermentation process helped to kill off harmful bacteria. Mead, a fermented drink made from honey, was often reserved for special occasions and celebrations. The Vikings were skilled brewers, and mead was a symbol of festivity and honor. Dairy products, including milk, cheese, and butter, were also an important part of the Viking diet. Cows were kept for their milk, and Vikings would make butter and cheese from it. Cheese was often eaten with bread or porridge, and was a valuable source of protein during the winter when fresh food was harder to come by. Social structure, the Viking hierarchy. While the Vikings are often romanticized as wild, barbaric warriors, their society was complex, structured, and hierarchical. At the top of Viking society were the kings and noble families, followed by the freemen, the independent farmers, traders, and craftsmen. Below them were the thralls, slaves, who performed the hardest labor in Viking society. The kings and nobles, Viking kings and chieftains ruled over their lands with authority and power. They were often elected by their people, but their leadership was based on both military prowess and the wealth they accumulated through trade, raiding, and conquest. Viking rulers were also seen as leaders in battle and often participated directly in raids and military campaigns. The nobility was made up of those who had large estates, often gained through successful raids or trade. These individuals had power and influence in their local regions. They owned land, livestock, and slaves, and could command the loyalty of their warriors. Freemen. The freemen were the backbone of Viking society. These individuals were independent, farmers, craftsmen, and traders who lived in Viking towns and villages. They had the right to own land, raise families, and make decisions for themselves. Although they had the freedom to participate in the community's trade and military efforts, they were also expected to serve in battle when called upon. The thralls. The lowest social class in Viking society were the thralls, slaves who performed manual labor, from working in the fields to serving in the homes of their masters. Thralls were typically captured during raids or purchased through trade. Their lives were harsh, and they had no rights in Viking society. However, some thralls could earn their freedom through hard work or by saving money, and a few even managed to rise in status. Viking family life, roles and responsibilities. The Viking family was the fundamental unit of society. The roles of family members were strictly defined, and everyone had their part to play. For the Viking woman, her primary duties revolved around the home. She was responsible for cooking, cleaning, child-rearing, and managing the household. Women in Viking society were also responsible for making clothing and textiles, and their weaving skills were highly valued. Many women were skilled in the arts of pottery, embroidery, and leatherwork. Viking men, meanwhile, took on the roles of warriors, farmers, and craftsmen. When they were not tending to their land or producing goods for trade, they were preparing for battle. The Viking man's strength, bravery, and honor were all considered vital traits. Children were trained in the skills of their parents from a young age, with boys learning to fight and hunt, and girls learning to cook, clean, and care for the home. The Viking family was also a close-knit unit that supported each other. They worked together to gather food, build homes, and defend their community. During the harsh winter months, when food was scarce, families would come together to share their meals and support one another. Viking life was a delicate balance of hard work, survival, and social structure. Despite the harshness of their environment, the Vikings were able to create a thriving society that supported the needs of the family, the community, and the individual. From their simple yet hearty meals to their complex social hierarchy, the Vikings found ways to live in harmony with the land and sea around them. The spiritual beliefs of the Vikings were integral to every aspect of their lives. Their worldview was dominated by the forces of nature, the gods they worshipped, and the myths and legends that explained the world around them. Their religion was not a fixed, organized system of worship like Christianity, but rather a fluid set of beliefs shaped by their experiences as seafarers, warriors, and farmers. At the heart of Viking spirituality was the belief in a pantheon of gods and goddesses who controlled various elements of nature, from the storm-ravaged seas to the quiet forests and fields. The Vikings did not view their gods as distant, abstract figures, but as powerful beings who were actively involved in their daily lives. These gods, they believed, could be called upon for help in times of need, and could also be appeased through rituals, sacrifices, and prayers. Viking spirituality was closely tied to the natural world. The elements, The earth, water, fire, and air were all believed to be imbued with divine power. The Vikings saw their land as sacred, and their gods as the guardians of their communities, ensuring fertility, protection, and victory in battle. The Vikings believed that the forces of good and evil were constantly at war, and their role was to align themselves with the gods to ensure balance and success in their lives. The Norse gods, powerful beings in the Viking pantheon. The Viking pantheon was rich with gods and goddesses who each had distinct roles and attributes. At the center of this pantheon were Odin, the All-Father, Thor, the thunder god, Freyr, the god of fertility and prosperity, and Freya, the goddess of love and war. These deities were believed to control the natural world as well as the fate of humans. Odin, the All-Father, was the ruler of the gods and the god of wisdom, war, and death. He was a complex and mysterious figure, often depicted as an old man, with a long beard and one eye, having sacrificed his other eye for the gift of wisdom. Odin was the chief god in Viking mythology and was often associated with the act of sacrifice, especially in battle. He was believed to choose who would live and die in the conflicts of the world, guiding the warriors who fought for honor and glory. Odin was also the god who presided over Valhalla, the great hall where warriors who died bravely in battle were honored and given a place in the afterlife. Thor, the son of Odin, was the god of thunder, storms, and strength. He was often portrayed as a mighty, red-bearded warrior who wielded the powerful hammer Mjolnir, which could summon thunder and lightning. Thor was seen as the protector of both gods and humans, fighting against giants and other threats to ensure the safety of the world. His role as a defender of the gods and humans made him one of the most beloved and revered deities among the Vikings. Freya, the goddess of love, beauty, fertility, and war, was another prominent figure in Viking religion. She was known for her beauty and grace, but also for her fierce nature in battle. Freya was also the goddess of the afterlife, ruling over Folkvanger, a field where half of those who died in battle were taken to rest. Freya's dual nature, being both a goddess of love and war, reflected the complex and often contradictory aspects of Viking society. She was often depicted riding a chariot drawn by two cats and was believed to possess the ability to shapeshift. Freyr, Freya's brother, was the god of prosperity, peace, and fertility. He was associated with agriculture and the harvest, as well as with peace and abundance. Freyr was often depicted as a handsome and youthful figure, holding a large golden boar named Gullinbursti. He was one of the most important gods for the Vikings, as his influence was felt in both the fertility of the land and the prosperity of the people. Freyr was also considered a god of justice and fairness, and his blessings were sought for bountiful crops and peaceful times. Other gods and goddesses in the Viking pantheon included Tyr, the god of law and justice, who sacrificed his hand to bind the wolf Fenrir, and Loki, the trickster god, who was both a helper and a troublemaker for the gods. Hel, the goddess of the underworld, ruled over the realm of the dead, where those who did not die in battle were believed to go. The Vikings and the afterlife, Valhalla and Folkvanger. The Viking view of the afterlife was shaped by their belief in an eternal struggle between order and chaos. The afterlife was not seen as a place of eternal rest, but rather as a continuation of the struggles of life, where the worthy were rewarded for their bravery and honor. The most famous afterlife destination for Vikings was Valhalla, the great hall of Odin, where those who died bravely in battle were welcomed. Valhalla was not just a resting place, but a place where warriors could continue their training and preparation for the ultimate battle at Ragnarok, the end of the world. The warriors who were chosen by Odin, known as the Einherjar, spent their days feasting and fighting, honing their skills for the final battle. They were served by the beautiful Valkyries, warrior maidens who were tasked with selecting the bravest souls to take to Valhalla. In contrast, Folkvanger was the realm of Freya, where half of the warriors who died in battle were taken, while Valhalla was reserved for those who had fought with exceptional bravery. Folkvanger was seen as a more peaceful resting place, where those who had shown valor but not necessarily the most heroic feats were honored. The two realms were not in competition, but represented different paths of the afterlife for the Viking warriors. For those who died of illness, old age, or other causes not related to battle, the afterlife was not as glorious. They were believed to enter the realm of Hell, where the goddess of the same name presided. Hell was a cold and dark place, far from the glory and feasting of Valhalla. Those who died in more peaceful circumstances were thought to live on in Hell, where they were left to dwell in an indifferent afterlife. The Vikings believed that their actions in life determined their fate in the afterlife. Honor and bravery were paramount, and it was through these virtues that a warrior earned his place among the gods. To die honorably in battle was the greatest achievement, and this would ensure a place in one of the glorious halls where feasting, fighting, and eternal glory awaited. Ragnarok. The end of the world, one of the most significant myths in Viking culture, was the story of Ragnarok, the apocalyptic battle that would mark the end of the world. According to Viking belief, the gods, led by Odin, would face off against their enemies, the giants led by Loki and his children, and battle until the world was destroyed. The earth would be submerged in water and many of the gods would die, including Odin, Thor, Freya, and Loki. However, after the destruction of Ragnarok, a new world would emerge, reborn and fertile. Ragnarok was not merely a cosmic battle. It represented the cyclical nature of life and death, creation and destruction. It was a time when the forces of chaos would rise up against the order established by the gods, but it was also a time for renewal. In this sense, Ragnarok symbolized the eternal struggle between good and evil, order and disorder, a battle that would continue long after the destruction of the old world. Viking myths and legends, stories of heroes and monsters, the myths and legends of the Vikings were filled with tales of gods, heroes, and monsters, stories that were passed down through generations and told in epic poetry and sagas. These stories were integral to Viking culture, shaping their worldview and providing lessons about honor, bravery, and morality. The Völsunga saga, for example, tells the story of Sigurd the Dragon Slayer, a hero who embarks on a quest to slay a dragon and gain the treasure it guards. Sigurd's adventures, filled with betrayal, love, and loss, are a central part of Viking mythology. The saga explores themes of fate, destiny, and the consequences of one's actions. Another famous myth is the story of the Norse giants, who were often depicted as enemies of the gods. The giants represented the forces of chaos and destruction, constantly challenging the order established by Odin and his kin. The gods' battles with the giants were a key element of Viking myths, and these stories often highlighted the tension between the forces of creation and the forces of destruction. Loki, the trickster god, is another central figure in Viking mythology. Known for his cunning and mischief, Loki often caused trouble for the gods, though he was also responsible for some of their greatest achievements. His role in the myth of Ragnarok, where he sides with the giants, marks him as a symbol of the chaotic forces that would ultimately bring about the end of the world. The role of the Skalds, poets and storytellers of the Vikings. The Vikings were also known for their love of storytelling, which played a crucial role in preserving their myths and legends. Skalds were the poets and storytellers of Viking society, responsible for composing and reciting epic poems about the gods, heroes, and battles. These poems were often performed in front of a gathering, with the Skalds' words bringing the gods and heroes to life. Skaldic poetry was highly regarded in Viking culture. It was a way to honor the gods, commemorate victories, and immortalize the deeds of great warriors. Skalds were not only entertainers, but also historians, preserving the past through their songs. Some of the most famous Skalds included Egil Skallagrimsson, whose works are still studied today for their insight into Viking culture and values. Viking spirituality, with its rich mythology and connection to nature, provides a fascinating insight into the beliefs and values of this warrior society. The gods and myths of the Vikings were not distant abstractions, but powerful forces that shaped every aspect of their lives, from the daily struggles of survival to their grandest ambitions for honor and glory in battle. As we look back on their spirituality, we can appreciate how it guided their choices, their actions, and their sense of identity. The enduring legacy of Viking spirituality can still be felt today, in the stories we tell, the heroes we admire, and the connection we have to the natural world around us. The Vikings, in their quest for knowledge, bravery, and honor, left behind a cultural heritage that continues to inspire us and shape our understanding of the human spirit. Introduction to Viking exploration. The Vikings, renowned as fierce warriors and exceptional seafarers, were much more than just raiders. They were explorers, traders, and settlers who traveled vast distances, leaving their mark across much of Europe, the North Atlantic, and even parts of North America. The Viking Age, spanning from approximately 793 AD to 1066 AD, was a period of rapid expansion and transformation, driven by a combination of necessity, curiosity, and the Viking love for adventure. While Viking raids have become legendary in history, the Vikings' legacy as explorers and colonizers is equally significant. Their voyages, led by powerful chieftains and driven by advanced maritime technology, expanded the geographical boundaries of the known world, influencing the cultures and societies they encountered along the way. But what drove the Vikings to explore such distant lands? And how did they accomplish such feats of navigation and exploration? Let's delve into the Vikings' extraordinary journeys, their motivations, and the legacy of their exploration. The Viking longships, masterpieces of maritime technology. One of the key factors that enabled the Vikings to embark on such long and dangerous journeys was their innovative shipbuilding techniques. The Viking longship was a marvel of engineering that allowed the Vikings to navigate both the open seas and shallow rivers with equal skill. These ships were long, narrow, and agile, built to withstand the challenges of the harsh northern waters, while also offering speed and flexibility for raiding, trading, and exploring. The longship was a perfect combination of functionality and design. It featured a shallow draft that allowed it to sail in both deep oceans and shallow coastal waters, making it easy to access remote areas for raids or settlements. The ships were typically powered by both sails and oars, giving them the versatility to navigate various wind conditions. The Viking longship was also incredibly fast, enabling the Vikings to launch surprise attacks on coastal towns or escape quickly when necessary. In addition to their practicality, Viking longships were beautifully crafted, adorned with intricate carvings and symbols that represented the identity of the ship and its crew. The prows of many longships were shaped like dragons or serpents, designed to intimidate enemies and provide a sense of power and prestige to the Vikings. These ships, known as drakar, became synonymous with Viking strength and their presence on the seas. The Vikings were not only adept at using these ships for raiding and trade, but also for exploration. The design of the longship allowed them to sail across the open ocean to distant lands, and it was with these ships that they ventured to new shores, discovering and settling in places far from their Scandinavian homeland. Viking exploration in the North Atlantic. The Vikings' most famous explorations were in the North Atlantic, where they ventured far beyond their homelands in Scandinavia. Their first major expansion came with the settlement of Iceland in the late 9th century. Iceland was an isolated island, located roughly halfway between Greenland and Norway, and was an ideal place for the Vikings to establish a new community. The Icelandic settlements were founded by Norse explorers, the most notable being Ingolfur Arnason, who is traditionally credited with being the first Viking settler of Iceland. According to Icelandic sagas, Ingolfur established a settlement in the region known as Reykjavik, now the capital of Iceland. Over the following decades, more Vikings followed, establishing a thriving Norse society that lasted for centuries. Iceland became a crucial center for Viking culture, trade, and governance, and its Althing, the world's oldest parliament, became a model for later European political institutions. From Iceland, the Vikings continued their explorations westward to Greenland, another vital chapter in their journey of discovery. Eric the Red, a Viking outlaw, is credited with founding the first Norse settlements in Greenland around 986 AD. After being exiled from Iceland, Eric sailed westward to Greenland, naming the land to attract settlers, despite its icy and inhospitable climate. The Greenlandic settlements flourished for several centuries, with Viking communities relying on hunting, fishing, and farming to sustain their way of life. In addition to Iceland and Greenland, the Vikings also explored the coasts of the Faroe Islands, Shetland Islands, and Orkney Islands. These territories provided important stepping stones for further exploration across the Atlantic, and they became key trade routes for Viking ships traveling from Scandinavia to the British Isles and beyond. Vikings in North America, Leif Erikson, and Vinland, while Viking exploration in the North Atlantic is well documented, their journey to North America is perhaps the most extraordinary of all. Around 1000 AD, Leif Erikson, the son of Eric the Red, sailed further west across the ocean and became one of the first Europeans to set foot on North American soil, almost 500 years before Christopher Columbus. Leif's journey to North America is recorded in several sagas, particularly the saga of the Greenlanders and the saga of Eric the Red, though the exact location of his landing has been a subject of much debate. According to these sagas, Leif landed in a region he called Vinland, which is believed to have been located in what is now Newfoundland, Canada. The name Vinland is thought to refer to the fertile land and the abundance of wild grapes in the area, which was a stark contrast to the harsh environment of Greenland and Iceland. Leif Erikson's settlement in Vinland was short-lived, and the Vikings eventually abandoned the area, possibly due to conflicts with the native Skrælings, the indigenous peoples of North America, as well as the difficulty of maintaining a distant colony. However, Leif's journey represents one of the earliest instances of European exploration of the American continent, and demonstrates the Viking spirit of exploration. In recent years, archaeological evidence has supported the idea that the Vikings did indeed establish a settlement in Vinland. The Lonso Meadows site in Newfoundland has been identified as a Viking settlement, with remains of longhouses and artifacts such as iron nails and Viking-style axes found at the site. This discovery provides solid evidence of the Vikings' presence in North America and their ability to establish successful outposts far from their homelands. Viking raids and colonization of the British Isles. In addition to their exploration in the North Atlantic, the Vikings were also known for their raids and eventual colonization of parts of the British Isles. The Viking Age in Britain began in 793 AD with the infamous raid on Lindisfarne, a Christian monastery on the northeast coast of England. This raid marked the beginning of a series of attacks on monasteries, towns and villages along the coasts of England, Scotland, Ireland and Wales. The Vikings saw these raids as both a way to gain wealth and power, as well as an opportunity to establish settlements in new territories. The Vikings' raids on Britain were led by Danish and Norse warlords, including Ivar the Boneless, Bjorn Ironside, and Ragnar Lothbrok, who became legendary figures in Viking lore. These raids were often brutal, and the Vikings quickly became feared throughout Europe for their speed, agility, and ruthlessness. By the 9th and 10th centuries, Viking settlers had established large communities in parts of England, particularly in the Danelaw region, which was a territory controlled by the Vikings. The most famous Viking settlement in Britain was York, which became a major center for Viking culture and trade. The city, known as Jorvik in Viking times, was home to a thriving marketplace, where goods from across the Viking world were traded, including wool, furs, and even slaves. The Vikings also established settlements in Ireland, including the city of Dublin, which became a major trading hub. While the Vikings initially came to raid and pillage, they eventually integrated with the local populations, intermarrying with the Irish and adopting elements of Irish culture. The Vikings played a significant role in the development of Irish towns and cities, and their influence can still be seen in modern Irish culture. Viking trade networks connecting the world. The Vikings were not only raiders and explorers, but also skilled traders who established far-reaching trade networks that spanned from the British Isles to the Middle East. These trade routes allowed the Vikings to acquire valuable goods such as silver, silk, spices and exotic animals, and in return, they exported goods such as furs, timber and slaves. The Viking trade routes were extensive, stretching across Europe, Asia and even North Africa. One of the most significant Viking trade routes was the Volga trade route, which connected Scandinavia to the Byzantine Empire and the Arab world. The Vikings traveled down the Volga River through Eastern Europe and into the heart of the Byzantine Empire, where they traded goods such as furs, honey and amber for silver and luxury items. The Vikings also had extensive contacts with the Khazar Empire in the east, a powerful state located in what is now southern Russia. The Vikings traded goods with the Khazars and served as mercenaries for their rulers, further expanding their influence in the region. In the west, the Vikings traded with the Frankish Empire and established trade links with other European powers, including the Saxons and the Celts. The Vikings were particularly adept at forging strong trading relationships with other cultures, allowing them to access goods that were otherwise unavailable in Scandinavia. The Vikings' exploration and expansion left an indelible mark on history. From their settlements in the North Atlantic to their voyages to North America and their raids and colonization of the British Isles, the Vikings reshaped the cultural and political landscape of Europe and beyond. Their longships, fueled by their unrelenting desire for adventure, enabled them to reach far-flung corners of the world, and their influence continues to be felt today in the cultures they touched. While their raids and conquests have often overshadowed their accomplishments as explorers and settlers, the Vikings' legacy as pioneers of the North Atlantic and their role in shaping medieval Europe should not be underestimated. Their ability to traverse vast distances, establish trade networks and create new settlements marked them as one of history's most remarkable peoples. As we reflect on the Vikings' exploration, it is clear that they were not just warriors, but adventurers who sought to push the boundaries of the known world. Their journeys continue to inspire us today, reminding us of the power of curiosity, resilience, and the drive to explore new horizons. Introduction to Viking kingdoms. As the Viking Age progressed, their initial reputation as fierce raiders and explorers gradually evolved into a legacy of organized kingdoms and powerful political structures. What began as loose bands of warriors and clans eventually gave rise to some of the most notable and influential Viking kingdoms in history. These kingdoms were characterized by strong leadership, expansive territories, and sophisticated political systems that were not only pivotal in the Viking world, but also left a lasting impact on the medieval European landscape. The transformation from raiders to rulers was not an instantaneous change, but rather the result of several key factors. The Vikings' ability to assimilate new ideas, their establishment of permanent settlements, and the development of strong, charismatic leaders who could unite the various Viking tribes and clans. As Viking kings rose to power, they established dynasties and political systems that helped solidify the Vikings' influence across Europe. In this section, we will explore the rise of Viking kingdoms, the development of their political structures, and the influence of notable Viking rulers. We will also examine how the Vikings' complex social, legal, and military systems allowed them to thrive and conquer vast territories. The formation of Viking kingdoms. The earliest Viking settlements were characterized by loose, decentralized political structures. Viking society was organized around the Thing, a traditional assembly of free men who gathered to discuss important matters, such as laws, disputes, and warfare. These assemblies were fundamental to Viking society, as they were the mechanism by which leaders were chosen and decisions were made. However, while the Thing played an important role, it was often local and lacked the centralized control needed for the governance of large territories. As Viking settlements expanded and kingdoms began to take shape, the need for stronger central authority became apparent. The development of Viking kingships was largely driven by the efforts of powerful chieftains who sought to consolidate their power and expand their influence. These leaders often gained their status through military prowess, wealth, or inheritance, and their ability to command the loyalty of their followers was crucial to their success. The first Viking kingdoms began to emerge in the late 9th and early 10th centuries. The most prominent of these was Denmark, which became a powerful kingdom under King Gorm the Old, reigned 936–958. Gorm's reign marked the consolidation of Viking power in Denmark, setting the stage for the kingdom's eventual expansion and its role as a dominant force in the Viking world. Denmark's political structure during this time was heavily influenced by Viking traditions, with an emphasis on loyalty to the king, the role of warriors as elite members of society, and the importance of controlling key territories. However, Denmark was not the only Viking kingdom to rise to power during this period. Norway and Sweden also developed their own powerful kingdoms, each with its own political system. The Kingdom of Norway. The Kingdom of Norway began to take shape under the leadership of Harald Fairhair, reigned 872–930, who is traditionally credited with uniting Norway into a single kingdom. Harald's unification of the various Norwegian tribes marked the beginning of a centralized monarchy in Norway, and his reign helped establish the foundations for the country's future growth. Harald's consolidation of power came at a cost. His campaign to unite Norway required a series of wars and alliances with other Viking chieftains. Harald used his military skill and the loyalty of his warriors to crush his rivals and expand his realm. His success in unifying Norway created a political system based on feudalism, where local lords were granted land in exchange for military service. The king, as the supreme ruler, retained control over the central regions of the kingdom, while local chieftains ruled their territories with relative autonomy. In the centuries that followed, the Norwegian monarchy continued to evolve, but Harald's reign laid the groundwork for the political structures that would define Norway for generations to come. The monarchy became a symbol of unity, and its authority was reinforced through the collection of taxes, the establishment of courts, and the regulation of trade and military service. The Kingdom of Sweden. Sweden's emergence as a powerful Viking kingdom followed a somewhat different trajectory from that of Denmark and Norway. While the first Scandinavian settlements in Sweden date back to the Viking Age, the kingdom itself did not achieve full unification until the 11th century under the rule of Olaf Skotkonung, reigned 995–1022, who is often regarded as the first Christian king of Sweden. Olaf's reign marked a pivotal moment in Swedish history, as he played a key role in converting the Swedish population to Christianity, which had a profound influence on the political and social development of Sweden. The introduction of Christianity also brought about significant changes to Swedish governance, including the establishment of a system of laws based on Christian principles and the strengthening of royal authority. Under Olaf Skotkonung, Sweden's political system began to reflect a more centralized form of monarchy. The king's power was bolstered by the establishment of royal law courts, the regulation of trade, and the collection of taxes. However, like Norway and Denmark, Sweden continued to rely on a system of local lords who exercised considerable control over their territories, creating a balance of power between the central monarchy and regional aristocracy. By the late 11th century, Sweden had become one of the most powerful kingdoms in Scandinavia, and its political and social structures laid the foundation for the development of modern Sweden. Charismatic Viking leaders and their influence. The rise of Viking kingdoms was not solely the result of political or military strategy, but was also heavily influenced by charismatic leaders who embodied the ideals of Viking society. These leaders were often larger-than-life figures whose personal qualities, strength, bravery, and wisdom helped them gain the loyalty and respect of their followers. Some of the most iconic Viking rulers left a lasting legacy through their leadership. Ragnar Lothbrok, a semi-legendary Viking king, is one of the most famous figures in Viking history. Though much of his story is based on sagas and myths, Ragnar is remembered for his daring raids on the Frankish Empire and his eventual rise to the kingship of Denmark and Sweden. His leadership was characterized by boldness, and his reputation as a warrior and strategist helped solidify his place in Viking lore. Similarly, Harald Hardrada reigned 1046–1066, known as the Last Viking, is remembered for his military campaigns in both the Byzantine Empire and England. Harold's efforts to conquer England in the 11th century came to a tragic end at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, where he was defeated by King Harold Godwinson of England. Despite his failure to conquer England, Harold Hardrada's legacy as a fierce warrior and king helped cement the Viking tradition of military excellence. Viking social and legal systems. The political rise of Viking kingdoms was paralleled by the development of complex social and legal systems that helped maintain order and stability in Viking society. The Vikings placed a strong emphasis on kinship ties, loyalty, and honor, and these values were reflected in their social and legal structures. At the heart of Viking society was the Thing, a democratic assembly of free men who gathered to settle disputes, pass laws, and make decisions for the community. The Thing served as a forum for political and legal discussion, where individuals could present their cases and be judged by their peers. The decisions made at the Thing were binding, and the assembly played an important role in maintaining social order within Viking communities. In addition to the Thing, the Vikings also developed a system of law codes that outlined the rights and responsibilities of individuals within Viking society. These laws, such as the Gragas in Iceland, were based on principles of justice and fairness, and they provided a framework for resolving conflicts and maintaining peace. Violations of the law were met with penalties, ranging from fines and compensation to exile or even death, depending on the severity of the crime. The Viking military structure. The Viking military structure was also an important aspect of the kingdom's rise to power. Viking warriors, known as berserkers, were some of the most feared fighters in history. The Vikings' military prowess was built on their mastery of combat, their use of long ships for quick strikes, and their ability to organize large-scale raids. Viking warriors were well-trained and highly skilled, and their leaders often led their troops in battle, inspiring fierce loyalty among their men. Viking kings maintained standing armies of professional warriors, but local militias also played an important role in the kingdom's military strength. The Vikings also relied on alliances and mercenaries to bolster their forces when needed. These alliances were often forged through marriage or trade, and they helped the Vikings expand their territories and strengthen their political power. The rise of Viking kingdoms was a defining moment in the history of medieval Europe. The Vikings, initially seen as raiders and invaders, transformed into powerful political leaders and kings who established lasting empires. Their kingdoms, built on military strength, social organization, and legal systems, played a pivotal role in shaping the political landscape of Scandinavia and beyond. The legacy of Viking rulers, such as Harald Fairhair, Olaf Skjotkonung, and Ragnar Lothbrok, continues to influence Scandinavian culture and politics to this day. The Viking kingdoms also left a lasting mark on European history through their interactions with neighboring cultures, their expansion into new territories, and their contributions to the development of medieval Europe. As we look back on the rise of Viking kingdoms, we see not just the story of violent conquest, but also the evolution of sophisticated political systems, legal structures, and military strategies. The Viking kingdoms were built on a foundation of resilience, leadership, and innovation, and their legacy continues to inspire and captivate the world today. Introduction to Viking. Religion was a central aspect of Viking life, influencing everything from their social structures to their views on death, warfare, and fate. The Vikings practiced a polytheistic faith centered around gods and goddesses who were believed to control the forces of nature and human destiny. Viking religion was not a rigid, institutionalized system like the Christianity that would later spread throughout Europe. Rather, it was deeply intertwined with daily life, with rituals and beliefs that were flexible and adapted to the needs of the individual or community. As the Viking Age progressed, the Vikings' religious practices began to evolve, particularly as they encountered Christianity during their raids and travels. The interaction between Viking religious traditions and Christian beliefs played a significant role in shaping the Viking world and the larger medieval European context. In this section, we will explore the main gods and goddesses worshipped by the Vikings, their religious practices and rituals, the role of the shaman, and the eventual conversion of the Vikings to Christianity. The Viking Pantheon, gods and goddesses at the heart of Viking religion was the pantheon of gods and goddesses, each of whom governed different aspects of the natural world, human experience, and the afterlife. These deities were believed to reside in Asgard, the realm of the gods, and each god or goddess had specific attributes that made them central to Viking spirituality. Odin, the All-Father, was perhaps the most revered and powerful of the Viking gods. As the god of wisdom, war, and death, Odin was both a figure of great authority and a symbol of sacrifice. He was often depicted as a one-eyed, long-bearded figure who sacrificed his own eye in exchange for knowledge and wisdom. Odin's followers sought his favor before going into battle, as he was believed to guide warriors to victory or Valhalla, the hall of the slain, where brave warriors would feast and fight until the end of the world. Thor, Odin's son, was another central figure in Viking religion. Known as the god of thunder, lightning, and protection, Thor was one of the most beloved gods in the Viking pantheon. His hammer, Mjolnir, was a symbol of strength and protection, and he was often called upon by warriors and farmers alike for his assistance in battle and to safeguard crops from the forces of nature. Thor's character embodied the raw strength and bravery of the Viking people, and his role as a protector of humanity made him a god of great importance in Viking religious life. Freyr, the god of fertility, prosperity, and peace, was also highly revered by the Vikings, especially in agrarian societies. As a bringer of good harvests, Freyr was a vital deity for the survival of Viking communities. His association with the earth and the elements made him an important figure for farmers, and rituals in his honor often took place in spring, at the time of planting and growth. Freyr was also connected with love and relationships, making him a god who influenced both the natural world and the lives of Vikings in their everyday experiences. Freya, the goddess of love, beauty, fertility, and war, was another prominent figure in Viking religion. Often depicted as a beautiful and powerful woman, Freya was associated with magic, and she was believed to have the ability to shapeshift. As the leader of the Valkyries, the female warriors who chose the bravest of the fallen to go to Valhalla, Freya was closely linked to the concept of death and the afterlife. She also had a strong connection to love and romantic relationships, as well as the mystical aspects of Viking spirituality. Other important deities included Loki, the trickster god who was both a friend and enemy to the gods, Balder, the god of beauty, innocence, and light, and Tyr, the god of law, justice, and war. Each god played a specific role in the religious narrative, reflecting the complexities and paradoxes of Viking life and belief. Religious rituals and practices. The Vikings were deeply religious people, and their daily lives were imbued with spiritual meaning. Rituals were an integral part of Viking religion, as they were believed to ensure the favor of the gods, bring prosperity, and protect against evil. Viking religious practices varied depending on the region and the specific god or goddess being worshipped, but there were several common elements that characterized these rituals. Blots were animal sacrifices performed to honor the gods and seek their blessings. These rituals involved slaughtering animals, usually a horse or a pig, and offering them to the gods. The blood of the animal was smeared on altars or trees, while the flesh was consumed by the worshippers. Blots were often held in the autumn during the harvest season or in preparation for battle. The Vikings believed that by offering blood to the gods, they could receive protection and favor in return. Cider was a form of shamanistic magic practiced by the Vikings, particularly by women known as vulvas or seeresses. This form of magic was used for divination, healing, and influencing events such as weather or harvests. Cider was believed to allow practitioners to communicate with the gods and spirits, and it was associated with the goddess Freya. These rituals often involved trance-like states and the use of chants, drums, and other mystical techniques. The Viking assembly, also had a religious aspect. It was not only a political meeting place, but also a venue for spiritual gatherings and rituals. The thing was used to settle disputes, make decisions, and ensure that the god's will was respected. Before important decisions were made, the Vikings would often call upon the gods for guidance, and oaths were sworn in the presence of sacred objects, such as weapons or the Yggdrasil, the sacred tree of life. Viking cosmology and the afterlife. Viking cosmology was a complex and intricate belief system that described the structure of the universe. According to Viking mythology, the universe was divided into 9 worlds, each with its own realm and function. At the center of this cosmos stood Yggdrasil, the great world tree, which connected all the worlds. The Vikings believed that the gods and humans inhabited different worlds connected by Yggdrasil. These worlds included Asgard, the realm of the gods, Midgard, the realm of humans, and Jotunheim, the realm of giants. Other worlds included Niflheim, the land of ice and cold, and Muspelheim, the realm of fire and destruction. For the Vikings, the afterlife was a significant concern, particularly the concept of where the souls of the dead would go. The 2 primary destinations were Valhalla, the Hall of Odin, and Hel, the realm of the dead. Warriors who died in battle were believed to be chosen by the Valkyries, the female spirits who served Odin, and taken to Valhalla. Here, they would feast and fight until the end of the world, when they would fight alongside Odin in the final battle of Ragnarok. For those who did not die in battle, the afterlife was less certain. Many believed that they would journey to Hel, a place of shadows and cold, ruled by the goddess Hel, who was the daughter of Loki. This realm was not a place of punishment, but rather a dreary existence for the souls of the dead. The transition to Christianity by the 10th century, as the Vikings began to interact more frequently with Christian Europe, many began to convert to Christianity. The process of conversion was gradual, often driven by political leaders who saw the advantages of aligning with Christian kings and establishing relations with the Christian Church. The Vikings who settled in England and Normandy were among the first to embrace Christianity, and many Viking kings adopted the new faith to strengthen their power. The conversion to Christianity was not without resistance. The Vikings had strong religious and cultural traditions that were deeply rooted in their beliefs. In some cases, the conversion was marked by a syncretic blend of Christian and Viking beliefs, with some rituals and gods being incorporated into the new faith. The cross became a symbol of power and protection, much like the hammer of Thor had been. In Iceland, where the Vikings had established a significant settlement, the conversion to Christianity occurred in 1000 AD at the Althing, the National Assembly. The decision to embrace Christianity was made by the chieftains, And while many Vikings initially resisted the change, the gradual process of conversion led to the eventual Christianization of Iceland. By the 12th century, most of the Viking world had adopted Christianity, marking the end of the traditional Norse religious practices. However, the legacy of Viking religion continued to influence the cultural and spiritual life of Scandinavia for centuries to come. Conclusion: the enduring legacy of Viking religion. Viking religion was more than just a system of beliefs. It was an integral part of Viking identity, shaping their worldview, social structures, and cultural practices. The gods, myths, and rituals of the Vikings were a reflection of their connection to nature, their warriors' code, and their understanding of fate and the afterlife. Viking religion was also a dynamic and evolving system, influenced by the Vikings' travels, interactions with other cultures, and eventual conversion to Christianity. Though Viking religion has largely faded from practice, its legacy endures in the form of folklore, art, and literature. The gods and goddesses of the Viking pantheon continue to captivate modern audiences through books, films, and television series, ensuring that the Viking worldview and their spiritual beliefs remain a lasting part of popular culture. As we reflect on the Viking legacy, we are reminded of the power of faith and belief in shaping the lives of people and cultures throughout history. The Vikings' ability to adapt, evolve, and integrate new ideas while preserving their core beliefs is a testament to their resilience and adaptability, and it provides valuable lessons for understanding the complex intersection of religion, culture, and society throughout history. Introduction to Viking society. Viking society was a complex and multifaceted structure that evolved over several centuries. Rooted in the harsh environments of Scandinavia, Viking society developed unique social, political, and economic systems that allowed them to thrive despite the challenges of their surroundings. As seafarers, traders, and warriors, the Vikings created a world that was as expansive as it was diverse. From the coastal villages of Norway to the bustling streets of Dublin and York, Viking society left an indelible mark on the history of Europe and beyond. In this section, we will explore the different facets of Viking society, including their social structure, laws and government, the role of women, the economy and trade networks, Viking settlements and cities, and the Viking shipbuilding revolution. Through this lens, we will gain a deeper understanding of the Viking Age and the culture that made it one of the most influential periods in European history. The social structure of Viking society. Viking society was hierarchical, with a rigid class structure that determined one's role and status within the community. At the top of the social ladder were the jarls, the noble class, who wielded significant power and influence. These rulers were typically large landowners and military leaders, responsible for maintaining order and ensuring the prosperity of their territories. The jarls had access to wealth, land, and the best resources, and they often held high political offices or served as regional leaders. Below the jarls were the carls, the free commoners. This class made up the majority of Viking society, and its members were typically farmers, traders, and craftsmen. The carls were free people who owned land or worked as independent laborers. They were the backbone of Viking society, providing the food, goods, and services that allowed the community to thrive. While they were not as powerful as the jarls, the carls had significant autonomy and were often the primary actors in Viking trade and exploration. At the bottom of the social hierarchy were the thralls, the enslaved individuals who were captured during Viking raids or born into servitude. Thralls had no rights and were considered property, often performing the hardest labor in Viking society. They were responsible for menial tasks, such as working the fields, maintaining household duties, or serving their masters in other capacities. Although thralls were at the bottom of the social ladder, they could sometimes gain their freedom through various means, such as purchasing their freedom or being granted it by their master. Despite the rigid social structure, Viking society was also known for its relative social mobility. A commoner who achieved great wealth or distinction could rise in status, gaining land, followers, and power. Likewise, even a jarl could lose his power if he was defeated in battle or faced significant financial difficulties. This fluidity allowed the Vikings to maintain a level of social flexibility uncommon in other medieval societies, fostering a spirit of opportunity and resilience. Viking government and laws. Viking governance was decentralized, with each region governed by its own laws and customs. There was no single unified kingdom during the early Viking Age, and each Viking community operated under its own leadership. Local leaders, often elected from among the chieftains or wealthy landowners, held considerable power over their subjects. The Thing, a gathering of free men, was central to Viking governance. The Thing was a form of assembly where free men met to discuss matters of law, politics, and justice. It was in these meetings that important decisions were made, such as the establishment of new laws or the resolution of disputes. The Thing was also a place where the community could voice their grievances and settle conflicts through legal proceedings. One of the most important functions of the Thing was the establishment and enforcement of laws. Viking laws were often based on customary practices passed down orally from generation to generation. They were designed to protect property, ensure the safety of the community, and provide justice for wrongdoings. The laws were administered by law speakers who were responsible for reciting the laws at the Thing and ensuring that the proceedings were fair and just. Viking laws were typically harsh and swift. Punishments for crimes ranged from fines and compensation to physical punishment and exile. The Vikings practiced a form of blood vengeance, where families or clans would seek retribution for wrongs committed against them. If someone was killed, the victim's family had the right to demand compensation from the perpetrator's family or take vengeance into their own hands. This system of justice often led to cycles of violence, but it was an essential part of Viking society, ensuring that honor and reputation were maintained. The role of women in Viking society. Women in Viking society had a significantly higher status compared to their contemporaries in other parts of medieval Europe. While the Vikings were a patriarchal society, women could own property, participate in legal matters, and hold positions of authority within the household and the community. Women were expected to manage the household, which involved overseeing the food supply, weaving textiles, and maintaining the home. In rural Viking society, women were vital to the survival of the family, as they were responsible for maintaining the household during the long, harsh winters. Women were also involved in trade and commerce, especially in Viking trading hubs, like Hedeby and Dublin, where they could sell goods or engage in negotiations. In Viking raids and warfare, women were not typically warriors, but they played an essential role in supporting the war effort. Valkyries, mythical female figures, were believed to choose the bravest of fallen warriors to go to Valhalla, Odin's hall for the slain. While this was a mythological role, it reflected the idea that women were integral to the warrior culture, even if they did not engage directly in battle. There are also accounts of women leading raids or serving as military commanders in Viking sagas, suggesting that women occasionally took on more prominent roles in times of crisis. One of the most famous Viking women was Lagertha, a shield maiden, who fought alongside the legendary Viking hero Ragnar Lothbrok. While Lagertha's story is partly legendary, it demonstrates the idea that some women could take on powerful and influential roles in Viking society. Despite their relative autonomy, Viking women were still expected to marry, and marriage was an important part of maintaining alliances between families. Women were often married off at an early age, typically in their teens, and their primary role was to bear children and maintain the family's honor. Divorce was allowed, though it was not common, and women who were divorced were entitled to keep their dowries and property. Viking economy and trade. The Viking economy was primarily based on agriculture, animal husbandry, and fishing. The Vikings were skilled farmers, and they cultivated a variety of crops, including barley, rye, oats, and wheat. Livestock, such as cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs, were essential to Viking life, providing food, clothing, and tools. The Vikings also relied on fishing, particularly in coastal regions, where they caught a wide variety of fish, including herring, cod, and salmon. In addition to their agricultural pursuits, the Vikings were renowned for their skills in trade and craftsmanship. They established extensive trade networks across Europe, Asia, and the North Atlantic. The Viking longships, known for their speed and versatility, enabled them to navigate rivers and seas, facilitating trade between distant lands. The Vikings traded a wide range of goods, including furs, timber, amber, weapons, and silver. In return, they acquired valuable commodities such as wine, spices, textiles, and luxury items from the Byzantine Empire, the Middle East, and other parts of Europe. Viking trading hubs, such as Hedeby in Denmark and Dublin in Ireland, became bustling centers of commerce where goods were exchanged and ideas were shared. The Viking economy was also influenced by their raids, which allowed them to acquire wealth and resources through the conquest of neighboring territories. Raids on wealthy monasteries, towns, and cities provided the Vikings with loot, which they could trade or use to further their military campaigns. Viking settlements and cities. The Vikings were not only raiders, but also settlers. As they traveled and traded, they established permanent settlements in many parts of Europe, including the British Isles, France, and Russia. These settlements grew into thriving towns and cities that became important centers of Viking culture and commerce. In the British Isles, the Vikings established the Danelaw, a region of England that was governed by Viking laws and customs. York became a major Viking stronghold and one of the most important cities in medieval England. The Vikings also founded settlements in Ireland, including Dublin, which became a major Viking trading hub. In Scandinavia, Viking settlements were typically located along rivers or coasts where they could easily access trade routes. Copenhagen, the capital of Denmark, was founded by the Vikings, and other Viking settlements in Norway and Sweden grew into important cities. These Viking settlements were characterized by their strong defenses, including fortifications and watchtowers. The houses in Viking towns were typically made of wood, with thatched roofs and simple furnishings. The Vikings built long houses for their families, as well as workshops, markets, and places of worship. The Viking shipbuilding revolution, one of the most significant contributions of the Vikings to world history, was their shipbuilding technology. The Viking longship, a marvel of engineering, revolutionized naval warfare and exploration. These ships were designed for speed, agility, and versatility, allowing the Vikings to raid, trade, and explore distant lands. The longship was built using a technique called clinker-built construction, where wooden planks were overlapped and riveted together to create a flexible and sturdy hull. The longships were light enough to be carried overland and could navigate both open seas and shallow rivers. This made them ideal for Viking raids, as they could swiftly travel to remote locations, attack, and then retreat before the enemy could react. Viking longships also played a crucial role in the Vikings' exploration of the North Atlantic. They were the key to the Viking expansion into Iceland, Greenland, and North America, where the Vikings established settlements such as Lons or Meadows in Newfoundland. The Viking ships were not just tools of war and exploration, but symbols of Viking culture and identity. They represented the Vikings' adventurous spirit, their prowess in battle, and their desire to connect with the broader world. Viking society was a dynamic and resilient culture that was shaped by the harsh environment of Scandinavia. The Vikings' seafaring nature and their complex social, political, and religious beliefs, from their hierarchical social structure to their innovative shipbuilding techniques, the Vikings left a lasting legacy in history. Despite their reputation as ruthless warriors and raiders, the Vikings were also skilled traders, settlers, and craftsmen. They established vibrant settlements and trade networks that spanned the known world, contributing to the cultural exchange between Europe, Asia, and the North Atlantic. Their social structure, based on kinship, loyalty, and personal honor, shaped the development of European society in the Middle Ages. The Viking Age may have come to an end, but the impact of Viking society is still felt today in the cultures of Scandinavia, the British Isles, and beyond. From their exploration of the New World to their influence on modern literature, art, and history, the Vikings remain one of the most fascinating and enduring cultures in world history. Introduction: the decline of the Viking Age as we approach the end of the Viking Age. It is important to understand the factors that contributed to the eventual decline of this remarkable culture. Spanning from the late 8th century to the 11th century, the Viking Age was marked by an era of exploration, raiding, and settlement. The Vikings left an indelible mark on history, but like all great civilizations, their rise was followed by a gradual decline. This section will explore the events, both internal and external, that led to the end of the Viking Age, as well as the lasting legacy that the Vikings left behind in Europe and beyond. Factors leading to the decline of the Vikings. The decline of the Vikings can be attributed to several key factors, both internal and external. The Vikings were not a single unified people, but a collection of distinct Norse societies, each with its own leaders, laws, and customs. While these societies were highly effective in raiding and exploring, they eventually faced internal divisions, external pressures, and cultural changes that contributed to their downfall. The rise of stronger kingdoms, one of the primary reasons for the decline of the Viking Age, was the rise of stronger centralized kingdoms in Scandinavia, England, and France. As Viking raiders expanded their territories, they inevitably encountered stronger and more organized opponents. The Kingdom of England was one of the first to unite under a single monarch, and King Alfred the Great of Wessex played a crucial role in defending against Viking invasions. The development of a centralized English military and the establishment of fortified towns and defenses made it increasingly difficult for the Vikings to raid and conquer with the same success they had enjoyed earlier. Similarly, in France, the Carolingian Empire began to consolidate power, and later the Capetian dynasty took control of much of the French territory. The Franks, under leaders like Charles the Bald and Louis the German, were able to mount successful defenses against Viking Incursions. The Vikings, once the terror of Europe, were gradually repelled and forced to abandon their raids on these well-defended kingdoms. The conversion to Christianity, another significant factor in the decline of the Viking Age, was the widespread conversion of the Vikings to Christianity. While Viking society was initially built on pagan beliefs and practices, the influence of Christianity began to spread throughout Scandinavia in the 10th and 11th centuries. The Christianization of the Vikings had profound effects on their culture and way of life. Christianity brought with it new values and customs, which gradually replaced traditional Norse practices. The pagan religion, with its emphasis on gods like Odin and Thor, gave way to the Christian faith, with its new pantheon of saints and a focus on the afterlife. This shift in religious beliefs had a direct impact on the Vikings' warrior ethos, as the concept of Valhalla, the Norse afterlife for warriors, began to lose its prominence. Additionally, Christian missionaries and kings exerted pressure on Viking rulers to adopt Christianity as a way of securing alliances with Christian kingdoms. The Viking raids themselves became less frequent as the Vikings began to settle down, convert to Christianity, and integrate into the larger European political structure. The Danish king Harald Bluetooth's conversion to Christianity in 965 marked the official Christianization of Denmark, and Norway followed suit shortly thereafter. As the Vikings embraced Christianity, they lost some of the very elements that had made them fierce and formidable raiders. The end of the Viking raiders. The most significant blow to the Viking raids came in the late 11th century. By this time, many Viking leaders had shifted their attention from raiding to establishing kingdoms and conducting trade. As Viking power waned, the once feared raiders became integrated into the societies they had previously pillaged. In England, the Norman conquest of 1066 played a pivotal role in ending Viking influence. The Normans, who were themselves descendants of Viking settlers in France, invaded England and defeated the Anglo-Saxon king, Harold Godwinson, at the Battle of Hastings. The Normans, under William the Conqueror, established a powerful and centralized kingdom that effectively brought an end to Viking invasions of England. In Scandinavia, the Viking Age came to an end as the Viking raiders turned to other pursuits. Many Viking leaders, such as the famous Sweyn Forkbeard and Knut the Great, sought to expand their power through diplomacy, marriage, and political alliances rather than through raiding. As Viking kings and chieftains integrated into the European political landscape, the era of Viking raids came to a close. The internal struggles, in addition to external factors, internal divisions within Viking society contributed to its decline. As the Vikings settled in various regions, disputes between different Viking factions began to emerge. These factions vied for control over territories, and infighting became common among Viking leaders. Furthermore, as Viking settlements grew, the need for cooperation between different Viking communities increased. The sense of unity that had once driven Viking expansion began to unravel, and the Vikings became more focused on consolidating power within their own borders rather than pursuing external conquests. The lasting legacy of the Vikings. While the Viking Age came to an end in the 11th century, the impact of the Vikings on European and world history is undeniable. The Vikings left a rich cultural and historical legacy that continues to shape the modern world in many ways. Exploration and settlement. The Vikings were among the greatest explorers of their time. They were the first Europeans to reach North America, establishing a settlement at L'Anse aux Meadows in modern-day Canada around 1000 AD. The Vikings' bold exploration across the Atlantic opened up new trade routes and laid the foundation for future exploration and colonization of the Americas. The Viking settlements in Iceland, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands also played a significant role in the development of the North Atlantic region. The Vikings' exploration and settlement of these islands paved the way for future migrations and trade between the Old World and the New World. Language and culture. The Vikings had a lasting impact on language and culture in the regions they settled. In England, the Vikings left a profound influence on the English language, particularly in terms of vocabulary and grammar. Many English words derived from Old Norse, such as sky, egg, knife, and window, can be traced back to the Viking influence on the language. In the Scandinavian countries, Viking culture and traditions continued to shape society long after the Viking Age. The Norse sagas, epic poems that tell the stories of Viking heroes, kings, and warriors, remain an important part of Scandinavian literature and cultural identity. These sagas provided a rich narrative tradition that continues to be celebrated in modern literature, film and television, art and architecture. The Vikings were skilled craftsmen, and their artistic traditions left a lasting mark on Europe. Viking art is known for its intricate patterns, symbols and motifs, which were used in jewelry, weapons, and even architecture. Viking metalwork, particularly the craftsmanship of their swords, axes, and armor, is still admired for its quality and artistry. Viking architecture, particularly their longhouses and fortifications, also left a lasting legacy. Viking longhouses, which were typically made of wood and had thatched roofs, were designed to accommodate large families and communities. The layout of Viking settlements influenced the design of future European towns and villages. Law and governance. The Viking system of governance and law also had a significant impact on European legal traditions. The Viking Thing, or assembly, where free men met to make laws and settle disputes, can be seen as an early form of democratic governance. This concept of local assemblies and participatory lawmaking influenced the development of medieval and modern European legal systems. The Vikings in popular culture. In modern times, the Vikings have become iconic figures in popular culture. Films, television series, books, and video games have all contributed to the enduring fascination with Viking history and mythology. Characters like Thor, the Norse god of thunder, have become symbols of Viking power and strength, and the image of the Viking warrior continues to captivate the imagination of people around the world. From the History Channel's Vikings series to the blockbuster film franchise Marvel's Thor, Viking themes and characters are omnipresent in modern media. These depictions, while often exaggerated and romanticized, help to maintain the legacy of the Vikings in the public consciousness. Conclusion. Reflecting on the Viking Age as we come to the end of our exploration of the Viking Age, it is clear that the Vikings were a remarkable and influential people. Their ability to adapt, innovate, and conquer new lands set them apart from other cultures of their time. Whether as traders, warriors, or settlers, the Vikings left a lasting imprint on the world, and their legacy continues to shape modern society in various ways. The decline of the Viking Age was not the end of their influence. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new era in which Viking culture merged with the societies they had once raided, traded with, and settled in. The Vikings' exploration, art, language, and governance have all left lasting contributions to the cultural fabric of Europe and the world. While the Viking Age may be over, the lessons of their resilience, adaptability, and boldness continue to inspire generations of people to dream big and venture into the unknown. As we reflect on their achievements, let us remember the Vikings not only for their raids and wars, but for the cultural exchange, innovation, and legacy they left behind. With this, we close the final chapter of our journey through the Viking world. Thank you for joining us in exploring the fascinating history of the Vikings, a people whose legacy lives on in the pages of history, the languages we speak, the art we admire, and the stories we tell. Until next time, may your own journey be as adventurous and inspiring as that of the Vikings.